Okay, well, hey everybody, welcome. So today we have our good friend here, Fabrice, who's going to be presenting on the Tooling API. So without too much fanfare, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Fabrice, and let you run with it.
Okay, thank you. I don't have the right to share my screen.
Oh, okay. Let me take a
Yeah,
look at
I
that.
didn't check this.
One second here.
Yeah.
Okay, try it now.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So today the presentation is really regarding the so-called part of Tooling API. So that's why I'm saying it's not for developers. It's really the part that everyone can bring at home and use on a daily basis. And don't focus on the London coding. It's the presentation I did last year in London. So I just take the same presentation. It was easier for me. Okay. So I did the presentation with a friend of mine, which is with Doria. She's not here today. I was expecting her to come, but she wasn't able to attend the meeting. So regarding myself, I'm working as a technical architect and technical leader. And I'm also a certified Salesforce instructor. And I love to share what I know and to discuss with people on subject I love, or to help people, or even to ask questions to people. So that's my reason to be here tonight, is really to share my expertise on this subject. And I really hope that tomorrow you will be the expert and I will come and ask you a question regarding the same subject. So objective of the presentation is just to give you a quick overlook of what is the Tooling API. I won't go in depth on the subject, and then I will directly go on explaining you how you can use the so-called with Tooling API on a daily basis with a real use case, so real query and explanation of the purpose of the query, so you can try it at home after. Okay. So very brief introduction to what is an API. An API, so an API is just a way for communication. So you are the user, you are just asking to the API some information, and the API will just call the cook, for example, ask the cook the information, and then the cook will give the information, and the waiter will give you back the information coming from the cook. So it's exactly the same with Salesforce. As the user, you are just doing a request to the API. The API will call the server, and the server will answer to the API, and the API will give you the result. Okay, so a very quick introduction to what is Tooling API. I won't go on in depth on the subject. That was all what I wanted to explain on this. Okay, so now the very important part of the Tooling API is understanding that the Tooling API will be able to work on the metadata. Okay, so by metadata, we mean all the configuration that you have within Salesforce, like Apex class, flow, custom fields, object, whatever, as long as its configuration, its metadata, and it's what you can see inside the Tooling API. Okay, so unlike simple SQL, Tooling API cannot see the records you have within Salesforce. The Tooling API is only looking at your metadata. Okay, that's really the main difference you have with Tooling APIs, is dedicated to understanding how your metadata are behaving, and it will never allow you to see what's happening inside your records. Okay, so here you have a short comparison between what is the metadata API versus what is the Tooling API. So just for you to know that if you are used to work with Workbench, Workbench is mainly working with the metadata API. And the purpose of the metadata API is really to give you a lot of information. So Salesforce within the metadata API will grab a lot of information, where when you are working with the Tooling API, you have a granularity. So you can really say to Salesforce what you want to see. Okay. So with the metadata API, you will have a lot of information. With the Tooling API, you can really focus on the information you want to see. So when you will work with the Tooling API, all you have to say to Salesforce is on which object you want to work. You can put which clause where you want, and after you can ask to Salesforce, I just want to use some information in the field I'm asking you. I don't want other information. Okay. So unlike the metadata API, in Tooling API, you can really say to Salesforce, I just want to focus on this information. I don't want to have a lot of information. Okay. And unlike the metadata API, the strongest part of the Tooling API is the where filter. You can already focus on the information you want to see. Okay. So Tooling API has two different usage. So one is for developers. I will not go in depth on this subject. What will interest you today is what you can do as an admin. So admin can do a lot of things like having a quick overview regarding the naming convention. You can scan your objects, scan your fields, check your sharing models, and so on. Okay, so that's what we will see today. Okay. If you want to use the Tooling API, there is a lot of different tools that will support it. So you can use Workbench, not the easiest way to do it, but you can say to Salesforce, I want to use a Tooling API query within Workbench. You can use the developer console. So if you want to use the developer console, you just have to check the use Tooling API checkbox on the bottom of developer console. You can use Inspector. So if you are fond of Inspector, like a lot of people, you just have to check the box use Tooling API, and then the SQL will work in tooling mode, not in normal mode. So it will be able to see the metadata, but it won't be able to see the standard record. So just be aware of this. As soon as you switch to the Tooling API, you don't have the right to list the contact, account, case, or custom object. You can only watch what's happening with your metadata. Okay, and just uncheck the box if you want to go back to the normal mode. And another tool is Admin Booster. It has been done by a certified technical architect in France. But there is a lot of different tools that are able to work with Tooling API in SQL. So choose the one you prefer. Almost all of the tools on the market are working really well with the Tooling API. Okay. Now let's go for real example. So first, I want to access to all my custom fields. So if you want to do this, you can say to Salesforce, I want to work on the custom field object. And from this, Salesforce has access to all custom fields without restriction. So if you have 20,000 custom fields, Salesforce will be able to bring all the 20,000 custom fields at once. You don't have to limit anything. Salesforce is able to provide them all at once. Okay. So it has two purposes for this query. The first one, we are using it a lot on our project just to be sure that people are pushing a description for all custom things. So you can quickly have access to the description field of all your custom field and check if it's filled or not. And when it's not filled, you can ask the creator why he didn't put a description to the field. Sometimes it's because the name of the field is very easy to understand. Sometimes it's just because the creator of the field was lazy, so you can really ask him to do something because you want the description to be set. Okay. So if you want the creator of the field, you just have to add the created by .name, and you will have the name of the person that has created the field. And recently, I had another subject. I wanted to check how many roll-up summary fields I had within Salesforce on the new org I'm working with. And I just discovered that if I want this information, it's located in the custom field. You have a field that is named summary operation. Summary operation is just a way for Salesforce to do, I'm doing a roll-up summary operation for you. So as long as the field summary operation is not empty, it means that the custom field is the roll-up summary. Okay. So if you have to check this, just know that it's one of the fields you have in custom field. Okay. Second point, you have to understand when you will work with the Tooling API is what Salesforce call entity definition. So entity definition for Salesforce is mainly custom and standard object. Okay, normally it should be all metadata, but in the reality, entity definition for Salesforce mean I want to know what is the custom object or what is the standard object you are working with. Okay. When you will work with the entity definition, there is different field you have to know. So the first one is the entity definition ID. So it's the ID of your custom field or ID of your standard field. Sorry, it's the ID of your custom object or the ID of the standard object. So if you're working on a standard object, the entity definition ID will always be the name of the standard object. If you're working on a custom object, the entity definition ID will be a real ID. So don't be surprised if the ID is the name of your standard object. It's how Salesforce is working. After, if you want to have what we are used to work with custom object is the qualified API name. So if you ask Salesforce the qualified API name of your entity definition object, Salesforce will return to you either the name of the custom object, or again, it will return to you the name of the standard object. Okay, so it really depends what you want to see. You have an example here. So if here the entity definition is account, the qualified API name is again account. Okay. And if I'm working on a custom object, what I can see is that entity definition will be a real ID, and the qualified API name is the name of the object as I'm used to work with it. Okay. And the last tricky part with Tooling API is that entity definition doesn't have a real ID. So if you do select ID from entity definition, Salesforce won't be able to provide you an ID, because the entity definition ID is not stored inside the ID field. It's stored inside the what Salesforce called the durable ID. So if you want to work with the real ID of a custom object or standard object with entity definitions, it's either use the entity definition ID or the entity definition.durable ID. Okay, it's the only way you can have access to the ID of your custom object or the standard object. It's just a tricky part within Salesforce. Okay, and let's go back to
real quick before you go forward. If you're working with a field that's in a managed package, so it has a namespace, does that show up in both the qualified API name, or an API name and the developer name, or how does that differentiate?
That's a good question. I don't work with managed package, but I think for me, the qualified API name and the durable ID and the developer name will not display the namespace. The only way you can see the namespace is with the full name. Only the full name should be able to contain them. Yeah. Gotcha. And the tricky part is if you want the full name in Tooling API, you have to work on only one record. Okay, it's really the part I hate with Salesforce. You cannot say to Salesforce, I want all the full name of my object. Salesforce will complain and will tell you, you have to work on only one object. I'm not able to work on the full name of the object, all of the object at the same time. It's really one of the things I really hate with the Tooling API. Okay. So it's really the tricky part. When you need the full name, you really need to say this is the durable ID of my object or custom field. Give me the full name of the object or give me the full name of my custom field. Gotcha. But you really need to provide the ID. So Salesforce will only work on one single ID, so one single record. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Very sure. And feel free to stop me if you have any question regarding what I'm saying. Don't wait for the end of the presentation. I prefer to answer question live. It's easier for me. So really feel free to do like Jason did. It's easier for us, I guess. Okay. So one of the another example you can have, if you want to check the sharing model of your custom object, you can use again the Tooling API, and this time you will work on the entity definition object. And what you will ask to Salesforce is just to display the internal sharing model and the external sharing model for your object. And Salesforce will tell you how your object is behaving regarding internal sharing model and external sharing model. Okay, so you can easily grab the information without to go inside each object to see if it's read-write, private, read-only, thing like this. Okay, so it's very easy to have a quick overview or of what is your sharing model for each of your object, whether it's a standard one or custom one. Okay. Another thing you can do with Salesforce is you want to see which object is searchable or which object is report enabled or which object is field tracked. Same, you can use this query and Salesforce will give you the result and will tell you for each of your object if the object is searchable or not, reporting enabled or not, or field tracked or not. Okay, so it's really the type of query you can use when you want to do monitoring of your org on for any reason that you have. It's sometimes useful. Okay. This one is one of the query I used a lot and I'm still using it. So the first thing you want to do is if you want to be sure that every error message using homogeneous wording, you can use this query and Salesforce will provide you the error message for each of the validation rules. So you can easily check that the error message are always following a specific way of naming and that developers are not pushing in the error message whatever they have in mind. Okay, so it's really helpful if you want to have an overview of what developers or admin are pushing inside the error message validation rule. And the other thing that I really use a lot was if you have an error message display on the screen, sometimes you don't know where the error message is coming. You know it's a validation rule, but you don't know which validation rule has been triggered. If you want to find the validation rule, you just have to use this query and you put in the where clause the error message like, and here you put the error you have on the screen, and then you will see what validation rule are able to contain the message you have on the screen. So it's very easy to find the validation rule or the validation rules if you have more than one that could be the one that the user is seeing and nobody is understanding where the validation rule is coming from. Okay, so it's really something that is useful, especially when you arrive on a new project and there is validation, a lot of validation rule, and you don't know which one has been triggered. With this query, you can quickly find where the validation rule issue is coming from. Okay. This one is used if you want to check if you have layout that are not assigned. Okay. So this one is a bit tricky, but the issue with Salesforce is we are very it's very easy to create new layout, but to see if a layout is still assigned to user or not is quite difficult. If you just run this query, Salesforce will just be able to give you all the layout that are not assigned to anyone anymore. It means that the layout is dead because nobody is able to use it anymore. So it's the type of layout you can directly remove from your org. Nobody will complain. Okay, so it's really a simple query that can really give you a highlight of all the layout you could remove within an org without breaking anything. Okay. This one is more used by people that want to check if they still have some flow that are obsolete. So it means that the workflow has a new version, the flow has a new version. So if you have a flow that is with the status of obsolete, it means the flow has a new version. So you could remove this version of the flow. Nobody is using it anymore. So it's not something you have to do on Sandbox, but it's something you should do in production time to time, is removing all the old version of the flow you have, because you don't want to keep a lot of flow that are unused by anyone anymore. Okay, so it's quick, it's easy to run and to check how many flow you could remove within a production org. So just think about it. Okay. The only thing you have to know with flow, there is a lot of different flows. So workflow means process builder. You have auto launch flow, you will see screen flow, and flow means it's a real flow. Okay, so workflow is process builder. It's the one that will disappear in the future because Salesforce doesn't want to keep them, and it's a good news for us. And auto launch flow, screen flow are real flow. Okay, so that's all you have to know. So it can be a way to find all the process builder you still have within an org. You just say, I want to see all the flow with the process type workflow, and Salesforce will give you a list of all the process builder you still have within an org. Okay. This one is useful if you want to have to extract information for all of your objects. So it's more like audit for an audit purpose, but if you want to have a quick access to all the limits you have per object, you can run the query, but the bad news is you have to give to Salesforce on which object you are working, so you cannot execute the query without adding entity definition ID here. Okay, if you don't put the entity definition ID, Salesforce will complain and will tell you you need to refine the query. I'm not able to run the query on all the objects at the same time. Okay, but if you want to do it, it's very easy. If you are a developer, if you know a developer, you can ask a developer to run the query on all the objects, extract all the information, put this inside the Excel file or whatever, and then you can do a quick audit review of your org if you need it. Okay. So this one is the most tricky of the session. So this one is done in 2 steps. So if you want to see what fields are unused or seems to be unused within your platform, Salesforce is providing a little bit of help. So you have to run this query. So if you run this query, you're just asking to Salesforce, I want to know all the custom fields that are used by a layout. Okay, so Salesforce, if you run the query, Salesforce will be able to provide to you a list of all the custom fields that are assigned to a layout. So the first thing you have to do is run the query. So you need to grab this query. Then the second query you have to run is this one. So here you are just asking to Salesforce the list of all the custom fields you have within the organization. And once you have run both queries, we go back on Excel. I know it's weird to say we are going back to Excel, but Excel is sometimes the best solution. So all you have to say is you put the first query within one Excel sheet, you put the second query in another Excel sheet, and with a VLOOKUP formula that is here, you will be able to find all the custom fields that are not displayed through a layout. Okay, so it's a quick solution to discover all the custom fields that are not displayed through layout. So it's not giving you a real understanding if the field is used or not, but at least you have an information that your field is not displayed on the layout, so you can start to figure out if the field is really used or not. Okay. But when you work with the metadata component dependency, so it's this object. This one is a tricky one in the world of the Tooling API. So when you work on the metadata component dependency, it has limits. So the worst limit you have is that Salesforce is not able to retrieve more than 2,000 records when you are working with this object. And what is horrible with this object is that Salesforce will never warn you that he has more than 2,000 records. If Salesforce is finding more than 2,000 records with the query, Salesforce will truncate the result, but it will not truncate the result by telling you there is 2,000 records. It will truncate the result in a way that the result seems homogeneous. So it means that it will, most of the time you have 1,300 records or 1,070, 12 records. So you have the impression you have all the records, but in fact you don't have all the records. Salesforce has done a truncate, and after the truncate is trying to bring an homogeneous result, which is not containing the 2,000 limit records it should provide you. So it's really, if you work with this API, with this object, just be careful that you really have to put some filter, because you will very quickly reach the 2,000 record limits. Okay, so it's really the most tricky object that we have within Tooling API. After, Tooling API can also be used for release updates tracking. So if you are the person in charge of tracking the release update that we have every 4 months, it was my case on my previous project. We were used to use this query to retrieve all the release update. So we put all the release update inside the Excel file, and then we are working with an Excel file to check where we are for each of the release that Salesforce is planning to do. So if you run the query, what Salesforce tell you, it will give you the category of the release update. But what will interest you is Salesforce will give you the release label when the update will be applied. And Salesforce will tell you in the step change, you can follow where you are with the release update. So you can see if you have already accepted the release update, if you still have some stage to go through. So it's a quick view of where you are regarding the release update that Salesforce is planning to do within the next months. Okay. If you are used to work with Sandbox, so some projects are working with Scratch.org. On my previous project and on my new project, we are all working with Sandbox. And the worst part we have with Sandbox, as a tech lead, my job is to be sure that my users are always refreshing their Sandbox at least once a month. It was my requirement. And before knowing that the Tooling API was able to do it for me, I was used to go inside my production org and check sandbox by sandbox if the developer were doing their job or not. If you run this query, Salesforce will just be able to tell you for each of the sandbox when it has been refreshed. Normally, no, it's not. It's not this query, but there is a way to know. With the sandbox it's not the sandbox process. There is another object which is sandbox info, I guess. But there is a quick way to know if your developer are refreshing their sandbox on a regular basis. Okay. Okay. So that's it. So we are at the conclusion. So I hope it was clear for you. So Tooling API is containing more than 200 records. So you have more than 200 objects you can query with the Tooling API. If you want to have the list of records, you can go on this link. Salesforce will give you for each of the objects all the fields that are available on the object. And after, it's just a question of going object by object, looking at the fields and try to figure out if the field can be useful or not regarding the project, the question you are having, or things like this. Okay. So in summary, what we can say is the SQL in Tooling API is a powerful tool if you want to retrieve config information. It just requires a basic knowledge of SQL. You don't have to be a specialist of SQL. There is no aggregation, nothing like this. All you can do with Tooling API is really simple query with simple closeware. So normally, most of the admins are able to write them. And once you are used to work with the Tooling API, you can really automate what we call the health check. So you can really do a full scan of your org on a monthly basis, 6 months basis, and have highlight of the information you want to track on a regular basis. Okay. Voilà. So if you have any question regarding the presentation, really feel free to contact me. You have my email. If you think that there is maybe a way to do it, to answer a question with the Tooling API, feel free to ask me to send me an email. I should be able to say you if you can do it or not. I'm already used to work with the Tooling API, so I won't say I've got all the answer, but I'm really used to work with it. So even if I don't have the answer, I should be able to tell you, yes, I think there is a way to do it, or I'm quite sure there is no way to do it. Okay. Okay, and that's all for me. So I hope my presentation was clear. And I hope it will give you some idea of what you can do with the Tooling API SQL. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Fabrice. It was so helpful, so useful. regarding the ID for custom objects, I think if you go to the object setting page for, let's say, any custom objects, you can get the ID of this custom objects in their URL.
Yeah, the ID is, but if you, let's, I don't have, the trick is, let me open, you have the ID, but even if you think it's an ID for Salesforce, it's not an ID, it's what Salesforce called the durable ID. That's only the main thing you have to know, in fact.
Oh, okay.
It's just the name is very surprising because I was expecting to have an ID and it's not the ID that you have to use. So just so if you just run this query, and if you ask the ID of the entity definition Salesforce will always tell you the ID is this one.
Okay.
If you really want to have the ID, you need to use the durable ID because Salesforce won't be able to provide you the information. And the worst is if you don't put the durable ID, if you just say, give me the ID, Salesforce will only return this, so you cannot use it.
Okay.
Okay, so you can have the ID wherever you want, but if you want to find an entity definition with the ID of the object, you need to use the durable ID.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yes,
that's really the tricky part with Tooling API or with this part. That's it.
May I
That's
ask
really
you what tool is this? I've never seen it before.
What?
What is this tool you're using?
It's a tool. It's a tool I developed for my customer because I needed many operations. I wanted to automate a lot of operations, so I did a tool to store all the automation I'm doing for my clients.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Does anybody else have any questions or anything you wanted to ask Fabrice?
Yes.
Okay.
Where do you find the Tooling API?
Sorry.
Could you repeat your question, Stephen?
I'm not familiar with the Tooling API. Where do you find it?
What do you mean? Where do I find? It's just what I've shown is just so-called query that you can execute with any so-called editor you have. You just need to switch from the normal way of working to the Tooling API way of working.
Yeah. So if you're in a Salesforce org and you go to the developer console.
Yeah, that's what I was going
to. When you click on the query editor tab, there's a little checkbox that you can set. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it's built in to Salesforce.
It's built. It's built in. Yeah, it's built into the.
Yeah, it's really something you don't have anything to do. Yeah. So if you just type your query here and switch to Tooling API, Salesforce will execute it. And what I said is, as soon as you switch to Tooling API, you cannot say Salesforce something like, give me the ID from my case. Because in Tooling API, you don't have access to the custom object or the standard object. Okay, Tooling API is really dedicated to metadata, so you don't have to write with Tooling API to see what's happening inside the record. Okay, so it's really the one thing you have to know with Tooling API is Tooling API is dedicated to metadata, and the one thing that is tricky is if you want to work with the field definition. So field definition is something you have in Tooling API and not Tooling API. So you can do exactly the same query in Tooling API and not Tooling API. The difference is if you're not in Tooling API, the query will only see the field that you have the right to see through your profile. And if you're in Tooling API, the query will be able to see all the fields that are inside the org, even if your profile doesn't have the right to see the file. The custom field. Okay, so it's one of the things I discovered recently is if you want to have all the field on a standard object, custom object, you have to go with the tooling API. It's the only way to be sure that you will see all the field, even the one that has been tagged not to be seen by system administrator or something like this. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Fabrice. This was a very informative session. I definitely learned something new from this one. I've used the Tooling API for just a couple of a few things, usually just to clear out Apex logs.
Yeah, that's it. But there is But really
Yeah.
feel free to drop me an email if you have questions, because I really try to focus on single queries, easy query, but there is so many queries you can execute that really feel free to drop me an email if you have any idea, question you have. I should be able to answer.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Thanks everybody for joining, and I'll see you again at our next one. Take
Thank
care.
you so much,
Okay.
everyone. Merci, Fabrice.
No, yeah. Have a good day for you, and see you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks.